Hey, nerds. So, I'm going to continue my series on Peter Sloterdijk's book called From Plato to Foucault, which is a somewhat history of philosophy from him. And I heard about Peter Sloterdijk, who is somewhat of a post structuralist philosopher, I guess you could say, who was very influenced by Foucault, who's, of course, my favorite 70s pervert post structuralist philosophers, a lot of you know. And he's talking about influences of different philosophers and the fact that philosophy is dangerous and you have to challenge your thinking and challenge your biases and that stuff in philosophy. So he uses a lot, he name drops a lot in this paragraph. So we'll just briefly go over who all of them are. Well, Plato, of course, arguably the most famous philosopher of all time, famous ancient Greek philosopher. Foucault, I explained who that was. Aristotle, we talked about the other day, famous ancient Greek philosopher who came after Plato. And Augustine, of course, that's another famous Christian philosopher who is basically just as famous as Thomas Aquinas, who I've been talking about in relation to Heidegger and Aquinas, that book by John Caputo, who's a post-structuralist philosopher, talking about Heidegger and Aquinas in terms of being in metaphysics. And Descartes, of course, he has that famous maxim, which is super dumb. I think therefore I am, which basically bases that on the fact that an evil god would not deceive him into believing that he exists, and there has to be a I have to exist in order to doubt that I exist, which of course is just a tautology. Anyway, Kant, of course, one of arguably the most famous Enlightenment philosopher. He had many famous ideas. Hegel, of course, heavily influenced uh, heavily influenced Slavoj Žižek and studied phenomenology and metaphysics a lot. And Schopenhauer, arguably the most famous or one of the most famous pessimists, of course. Nietzsche, almost everyone has heard of Nietzsche, who's the famous existentialist philosopher. He has the famous ideas like the Ubermensch and the death of God, of course. And then he also mentions Freud and Lacan. Freud, probably the most famous psychoanalyst of all time, basically the first psychoanalyst, and Lacan, who was a psychoanalyst who had different approaches to psychoanalysis, and he obviously was a heavy influence on Slavoj Žižek, along with Hegel, who, and I've of course talked about Slavoj Žižek before, my favorite Hegelian slash Lacanian slash Marxist philosopher who talks like this in Schniefschlatt. Okay, so anyway, let's get into the paragraph here. Okay, so philosophical temperaments from Plato to Foucault, a bold philosophical hypothesis. Sloterdijk's book is deceptive because it follows a strict, linear unfolding of seminal philosophical and theological figures from Plato to Foucault through Aristotle, Augustine, Descartes, Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and other seminal theorists. In this fashion, this work appears to simply reproduce yet another history of philosophy. But the truth is that nothing is further from the truth. As Sloterdijk himself states, he wishes to, quote, to provide a broader readership access to original philosophical thinking, unquote. That is why Philosophical Temperaments, his famous book, is by far the best book for accessing Sloterdijk's complex and mature philosophical system, or better, systems. Yet, this book comes with a warning sign. One should not read this book if one is looking to tame and master philosophy and theology, like viewing a captured lion in a zoo from a distance. That's a great analogy. Tame and master philosophy and theology as if you can analyze it from an external perspective, the way you would analyze an animal in the zoo from a distance. So, which is obviously begs the question: how can you view something that you're a part of from outside of it? Which leads to Kant's idea of transcendentalism, that you can that there are ideas that are basically even more transcendent than transcendent, and that we can't realize. And then plenty of other philosophers, Foucault, innumerable other philosophers have talked about, how can we truly understand conscious and metaphysics, since we're part of the universe and we are beings trying to analyze ourselves as conscious beings in the universe. Basically impossible to do right? So this is because philosophy is not safe. Thus, it is not so much that you read and quote unquote master these pages as much as these pages read you. That is, in his words, the discipline of philosophy must present itself first as a way of thinking and then as a way of life. I try to do that. I'm not anywhere near as good at it as some people, but I definitely try to do that. Especially in terms of philosophy, it's harder to integrate it into your life. But again, you don't have to do that. I'm sure someone like Slavoj Žižek would say that's stupid. Anyway, so the challenge is for you to prepare to be challenged where your tacit assumptions are interrogated. Challenge your biases, which is difficult for all of us, but we should. You must wrestle with the text, with yourself, and with your life. I definitely do that when I read complex philosophy, and then you learn so much, so many valuable lessons. Okay, so for Sloterdijk believes that philosophy is indistinguishable from every part of your life. This we he's a why he is a thinker who has the idea that the mind, body, and spirit are unified, more of like a spiritual approach to philosophy, you could say. If Sloterdijk is a holistic thinker, his methodology is developed through the psychoanalytic traditions from Freud to Lacan. So he's sort of a holistic slash spiritual thinker, but he conveys his philosophical and theological thoughts through his philosophy that the mind, body, and spirit are unified. So he expresses this idea that the mind, body, and spirit are unified through psychoanalytical tactics, let's say, from Freud and Lacan. But I think the overall underlying point of this that's the most interesting to me is that you are not safe in philosophy. Philosophy is dangerous. You have to challenge your biases. You have to interrogate dangerous seeming subjects like the trolley problem, for example. Everyone knows that. Would you, if there was a train coming to five people on the tracks and they were about to get hit, would you would you hit a lever that redirects the train toward one giant fat man and then it just kills that one person? Most people say they would do that, but then when you ask them if they would push the fat man off the bridge to block the train from killing five other people, there's that. And then you can think of countless examples in science fiction books and movies and just historical fiction and stuff where leaders have to make decisions. Should I like, especially in science fiction, should I nuke this entire planet and exterminate an entire population to save my side? Or should I kill an entire planet to save an entire universe? Or should I kill like 100 people to save a million? The complex moral philosophy, and that's just moral philosophy. So obviously, philosophy really, really challenge in our philosophy contains really challenging ideas, innumerable challenging ideas that are fascinating and challenging to investigate. And the more you understand them, the more you want to learn. But it's dangerous. People are going to question you. You're going to have controversial opinions. Hopefully, those are more interesting anyway. But yeah, if you're not a shit, to me, I think I try to have the more of the Slavoj Žižek approach. If you're not being a shit disturber, you're not spreading your philosophy enough. So be a shit disturber, man. Philosophy is dangerous.